We are both 52 years old. My wife and I met at a conference many years ago. I had just started working with my dad at his real estate firm and my wife had just started nursing school. From the start, I knew we would have busy careers, but I didn't think it would get in the way of our relationship. We always made time for each other, even if it was just a quick hour or two. Since there were no issues in our marriage, I never expected this to happen. We had a good bedroom life and frequently discussed concerns in our relationship. I should have guessed something was up when she began working later and later shifts at the hospital, but I simply assumed it was because her work required more of her time. My job doesn't require as much mental strain as hers, and I took over my father's real estate company many years ago, so the majority of my stress comes from homes not being ready or not closing on a particular date. My wife works at the hospital as a pediatric nurse. She works with kids and infants mostly, so I know her job can be emotionally taxing and sometimes she would come home and just need some time to herself. So I would give her that space. Sometimes she would come home crying saying she lost a patient today. Some of the kids had terminal diseases and she would just hold me tight and cry. I felt so helpless. All I could do was just be there for her. Over the course of the next few weeks, she became visibly distant, not talking to me as much, canceling date nights and working more and more. I asked her what was wrong, and she replied that she was simply worn out or that her job was stressing her out. I tried to be understanding. I know how much her job means to her, and I didn't want to add any more stress to her life. So I gave her the space and didn't press her. Fast forward a week and she seems like she is coming around a bit, not being so distant, showing me a little more affection, but not like it was. Again, I took what I could get and enjoyed the little affection she gave me. As a loving husband, I wanted to try to be supportive, not question why she was so mentally taxed all the time. I just wanted her to know that I was here for her, no matter what. But then I noticed her being distant again. This time, it was a little more severe. She was coming home later, not wanting to talk, and just seemed really checked out. I reacted differently this time. I didn't console her. It seemed a little more suspicious to me. So I asked her what was wrong again. And this time she snapped at me, telling me that I was just being paranoid and that I needed to stop questioning her. I didn't want to fight with her, so I left it be, but something inside me just didn't feel right. This day, she got home around 8 p.m. and walked in the door. She didn't even hug me, acknowledge me, nothing. I thought to myself something is up and I had to find out what it is. In the 19 years we have been married, she has never displayed this type of behavior. Every time she came home from work she would make a beeline right for me, kiss me and hug me and interact with me. But that has ceased. So the next day after work, I usually get off work before her. So I went to the hospital where my wife was working and waited for her to get off. I knew where she would park, so I waited for her. I kind of hid so she couldn't see me. I saw her walk out to the parking garage and she was on the phone, laughing and talking to someone as she was walking to her car. When she got into the car, she continued her conversation for a bit. Then she got off the phone. I wanted to surprise her, maybe take her to dinner, but I decided not to. It was strange to me because she would display a totally different demeanor when she came home. And we only lived 10 minutes from the hospital. When she left the hospital, I waited about 10 minutes before leaving to make sure she would make it home before me, and I went home. Her car was in the driveway. When I walked in, I didn't see her right away, but I heard a voice in the guest bathroom downstairs. She was talking to someone. Apparently, she did not hear me come in. I walked toward the bathroom and I said, "Hey." She was startled and hung up on the person she was on the phone with, which caught my attention. She looks at me and says, "Where were you?" I told her I had to work late and I walked away from her. I was starting to feel really suspicious and I wanted to know who she was talking to. I walked toward the living room to see if she would come out of the bathroom. After about 10 minutes or so, she came out looking a little flushed. I asked her again who she was talking to on the phone. I told her it sounded like you hung up on them. She denied it and said she got disconnected. I didn't want to argue with her, so I just dropped it. But I knew something was definitely going on. But I really didn't know what was going on with her. Valentine's Day was coming up, and maybe this was a chance for us to get back on track. I wanted to get the negative thoughts out of my head and maybe have a nice dinner, get her a nice gift, catch the sunset, talk, just good thoughts. But I couldn't shake how she reacted and her hanging up abruptly on the person she was talking to. The next day I called a few private investigators to see if they could help me out. I wanted to find out what was going on with my wife, but I didn't want to confront her about it just yet. I needed evidence, something concrete that would tell me what was going on. A few days later, I met with a private investigator and told him why I needed his services and told him I couldn't tell what was going on with my wife. He then asked me about her routine. I told him she usually goes to work at this time, gets off at this time, etc. I also told him when I did ask one time why she was coming home later, she snapped at me and said she was just working late. The private investigator told me he would put a tail on her and see what she was up to. He also wanted me to get him some pictures of her, which I did. A few days later, I got a call from the private investigator. and he told me he has some interesting information for me. According to his surveillance, my wife was meeting someone after work and it looked like she was having an affair. I was devastated. I couldn't believe it. I asked him who she was meeting and he told me he didn't know yet, but he would find out. I thanked him and hung up the phone. I was in shock. I couldn't believe it. My wife was cheating on me. The next day, I told the private investigator to continue his surveillance and find out who she was having an affair with. I wanted to confront her with evidence so there would be no denying it. A few days later, the private investigator called me back and told me he had found out who she was having an affair with. I didn't recognize the name, but he told me he would get some pictures of him, which he did. The day before Valentine's Day, the private investigator said, my wife walked out to the parking garage. As she was getting to her car, a guy walked up behind her, tapped her on the shoulder, she jumped into his arms and they started kissing. After the private investigator sent me the footage, the next thing I did was call a lawyer to see how I would fare in the divorce. My wife makes at least $70,000 a year as a pediatric nurse. I make twice that. So I wanted to know if I would be on the hook for spousal support. The lawyer told me it was likely I would have to pay spousal support, but I could try to negotiate a lower amount. As days go by, my wife is sensing something is wrong with me. I don't tell her I love her anymore. I always told her I love her before she walked out the door. I stopped doing that. I also stopped trying to initiate intimacy. Fast forward a week, I tell my attorney to go ahead and file for divorce. In the meantime, I start moving assets around. I had Bitcoin, a few stocks, and some mutual funds. I cast out everything and put it into my personal account. I also closed all our joint accounts. She has her own accounts, but we had a few joint checking accounts together with small balances. The next day my wife went to work. When she left, I immediately called some movers and had them come over and start packing my stuff. When my wife came home from work, she walked in and saw the movers packing my stuff. She asked me what was going on. I told her I am moving out. We're getting a divorce. She didn't say anything. She just stood there in shock. I then handed her the footage and photos that my private investigator took of her and this guy. She didn't say anything. She just started crying. After I moved out, my wife wanted to know if we could talk about this and try to work things out. I told her I don't see the point. You cheated on me. I don't trust you anymore. She begged and pleaded with me, but I was done. I told her I'm sorry, but this is it. You did this. The thing I said to her, we just need to deal with the divorce that's coming up. A few weeks later, after divorce hearing, we were ordered to sell the house, split the proceeds and all the other items inside the home. When I moved out, I only took my things and one bedroom set. I didn't care about the rest. I can replace it with the money I make. She didn't get any alimony because she ended up getting a raise from her job. She was promoted to chief nursing officer, which she applied for, which gave her an extra $40,000 a year. Now she makes $110,000 a year, which supports her lifestyle. After the divorce, I found out that the guy she was cheating with met him on Tinder and he is 11 years younger than her. I am a private person, but my good friend thought I should share my story. He told me no marriage is immune to infidelity. Even the ones that last a few decades, you just never know. I don't know what this forum is called, but you people were great. I never expected the support you guys gave me.